we are here in New York, and Mr. Ahmadinejad is here as well. Now, I avoid him because I think I've become deadly allergic to him. And I haven't even watched any interviews of him this year on purpose. I have not, because last time I watched an interview with him was, well, it was an interview, and he gave the talk in Colombia. And he said that we didn't have any gays in our country. And the thought that crossed my mind is that, well, we probably don't have any women in our country. We probably don't have any Christians in our country. We probably don't have any Jews in our country. What else don't we? We don't have anything in our country except deserts, probably. And he has become very famous because of his rhetoric and the really big lies that he tells. And the bigger the lie, apparently, the more pleased he looks with himself. And he's also become famous because he said he's going to wipe Israel off the map, and because of the whole nuclear issue. But let's not forget that the people of Iran have not been losing their children to the nuclear program. They have been losing their children for the last 30 years to the Islamic Republic of Iran, because he puts these kids, they put these kids, not only Ahmadinejad, but the system. And let's not forget that Ahmadinejad is only a very small part of the system. That the Islamic Republic of Iran has put teenagers in prisons in Iran for the last 30 years. And these teenagers have been brutally tortured, raped, and many of them have been executed. I was one of those teenagers between 1982 and 1984. I was in Evin prison for 2 years. There were thousands of political prisoners in a prison that was only built for a few hundred. And you can imagine when you put a few thousand people in a smaller space, you're going to run into a lot of problems, the least of which was not the torture that we had to endure. They would tie us up to bare wooden beds. We would be lying down on our stomachs, and someone would lash the soles of our feet with a length of cable. And that is one of the favorite methods of torture in the Middle East. But I'm not here to exactly talk about the torture for you right now. And from what we've heard today, a lot of people have had similar experiences. Unfortunately, torture is very common in our world. And just one thing I want to tell you about torture is that please don't forget that torture is not designed to get information. Torture is designed to break the human soul. So those who use torture, they tell you that it is to get information, but people lie under torture. I would have confessed that I was Jesus Christ if I had to. So that is the truth of it. Now, what is the situation of religious minorities in Iran? According to the law of Iran, now let's not forget that the law of Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is based on Sharia law. Under Sharia law, the law of Iran, religious minorities, the people of the book, that is how it is stated, the people of the book, Ahl al-Kitab, who would be Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians, are supposed to be protected and respected. They even have representatives in the Iranian parliament. But that is the surface of the situation. I grew up in Iran as a religious minority. I'm from a Christian family. And during the time of the Shah, I never, ever felt discriminated against at all. I'm not saying there wasn't any discrimination at all against religious minorities when I was growing up. I was born in '65, but I didn't see anything. I went to a Zoroastrian high school for girls. 60% of the students of the school were Muslim, 39% were Zoroastrian, and the remainder 1% were Jewish, Christian, and Baha'i. We had maybe 2 Christian students, maybe 3 Jewish girls. It was a girls' school, and we had about 10 Baha'i. And I never felt different. My Baha'i friends never felt different. My Jewish friends never felt different at all. And then the revolution happened, turned the world upside down. Now, the Christians and the Jews and the Zoroastrians were supposed to be protected. Of course, not the Baha'i, because they are not considered people of the book. So basically, if you are a Baha'i, it's reason enough for the government of Iran to put you into prison. When you're applying to go to university, there's a multiple choice kind of answer about your religion, and being a Baha'i is not one of them. Right now, there are 7 leaders of the Baha'i community in prison. They have been in prison, I think now it must have been 4 years. And they have, more or less, a little bit less, a little bit more, between the 7 of them, 20 years in prison. Why? Not because they have been political leaders or opposition leaders, simply because they are Baha'i. Being a Baha'i in Iran is illegal. Now let's get to the Christians. After the success of the revolution, I still attended the Catholic Church in Tehran. I went there regularly. The church owned 2 schools, one for boys, 2 high schools, one for boys and one for girls. And the schools were taken away from the church, and the government took over them. And they put the priests under house arrest, accusing them of being Israeli spies. Why? Why Israeli spies? Because they were priests, they were Catholic priests, they had studied in Israel. Eventually, they were released, and the Catholic Church, resumed what it was doing, but in a very limited manner. The schools were not given back to us at all. And still, up to this day, Christians do not have schools. And even the Armenians and the Assyrians, that they seem to have their own schools, it is the government that writes the catechism books for the Christian students. So this is an Islamic government that writes the Christian catechism books for the Christian students. How bizarre is that? Now, you are okay in Iran as a Christian, or as a Jew, or as a Zoroastrian, as long as you completely abide by the rules. When the revolution happened, the hijab became mandatory, and it didn't matter if you were a Christian or you were a Jew or whatever you were, you had to wear the hijab. Now you know that you probably know that under Iranian law, the testimony of a woman is worth half of the testimony of a man. That's the law. But also the testimony of a religious minority, let's say a Christian or a Jew or Zoroastrian, is worth half of the testimony of a Muslim. Now, if that is an equal law, if that is democracy, if that's human rights, I don't know. I really have to get things checked. So in Iran, you have to abide by all the rules that exist. And if you don't, you're going to get into deep trouble. You are not allowed to try to advertise your religion. So if I go up to a Muslim and I start telling them about my religion, about Jesus, about, the stories of the Bible, I could easily go to prison for that. Right now, there are 3 Iranian pastors in prison. Well, one of them actually was recently, in August, he was released on bail, but he's in danger of being arrested at any given moment. And 2 of these 3 pastors, the accusation against them is that they were trying to spread Christianity in Iran. Now, when I was in prison, I was forced to convert to Islam, and I did. Because if I didn't, my family would be in danger. So to protect my family, I converted to Islam. When I was released, I went back to my church, I went for a confession, and I was accepted back. But this also breaks the Iranian law. So in Iran, if you are a Muslim, even if you're a Muslim like me, who basically, there was a gun pointed to my head, and they were saying, okay, you have to convert to Islam. Even in that case, you're not allowed to convert to any other religion. So my conversion back to Christianity put a death sentence over my head. Is this freedom of religion? I would really like to ask this question from Mr. Ahmadinejad. Why is it? What are you afraid of? If you really believe in the righteousness of what you believe in, whatever that is, why are you afraid of me advertising what I believe in? Why do you feel threatened by me? This is not freedom of religion, Mr. Ahmadinejad. This is not democracy. Maybe in your books it is, but in reality it is not. Now someone asked me, is there laws of blasphemy? Because there has been a lot of talk about what's going on in Pakistan, and rightfully so. It is very scary that people could go to prison or they could be put to death because of something that they have said that could be considered disrespectful toward another religion. Does that exist in Iran? It actually, believe it or not, it kind of started in Iran. I don't know if you remember the case of Salman Rushdie. I guess many of you remember that. Ayatollah Khomeini put a fatwa on Salman Rushdie's head and said that every good Muslim has the duty and the obligation of shooting Salman Rushdie if they see him on the street. Because, why? What did Salman Rushdie do? He wrote a book, The Satanic Verses, which, by the way, was a fictional novel, completely fictional. And Ayatollah Khomeini decided that it was disrespectful toward the ideas of Islam. So put a fatwa in his head. It's amazing how we have short-term memory. You know, altogether, I find, especially here in the West, people forget things very quickly. The revolution in Iran happened in 1979, more than 30 years ago. And it was Ayatollah Khomeini that actually made it fashionable and acceptable to be an Islamist. And fanaticism became a huge issue from the time of Ayatollah Khomeini. And that was what led to this huge expansion of this ideology all throughout the world and eventually led to 9/11 and where we are today. And it is spreading as we speak, and it is taking lives as we speak. The situation of religious minorities in Iran is getting worse by the day. They cannot open their mouths. Anything they say could be considered as disrespectful toward Islam and this and that, and they could end up in prison. They really have to be careful with what they say, how they say it, and when they say it, and who's listening. So I really urge you to pay attention to these situations like this. Right now we have the Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring in the Middle East. But let's not forget again that the revolution in the Middle East happened in Iran in 1979. And in history, 30 years is only a blink. So what happened in Iran is not necessarily going to happen in the Arab countries, but it could. So please let's try to learn the lessons of the Iranian Revolution and make sure that we prevent the same thing from happening again in the other countries. Now, I was asked to share of what my dream is, and honestly, I had difficulty with that because I have too many dreams. So I kind of had to choose what it is, but I decided that it has to do with what we can do to make the world a better place. What can we do to change this situation? My dream is that every single person on the face of the planet decides to take 5 tiny little steps. Each one of us, 5 little steps to make the world around us a better place. It doesn't need to be complicated. It can be, each one of them can be just a simple act of kindness or something much, much bigger. And I don't think this is such a far-fetched dream. I'm not wishing for never-ending peace because, I don't know, I think that's very difficult to get. Not impossible, but difficult. But please think about it. And please, just in your lifetime, try to do 5 big or little things that would make the world around you a better place. Thank you so much for your time.